Sarah Matthews woke up every morning at 5:30, just like she had for the past 3 years. The rooster didn't even need to crow anymore because she was always up before him. She'd slip out of bed quietly, pull on her worn jeans and boots, and step outside into the cool morning air of her small Georgia farm. Her farm wasn't huge or fancy. Just 15 acres of good land with vegetable gardens, a small chicken coop, 2 goats, and a cow named Bessie. But it was hers and Marcus's, and she loved every inch of it. The smell of fresh soil, the sound of birds waking up, the feeling of peace that came with watching the sun rise over her fields. This was her happy place. Sarah was 32 years old, a quiet woman who preferred the company of plants and animals over people. She wasn't unfriendly, just private. In the city where she grew up, people were always in a hurry, always stressed. Out here in Willowbrook, life moved slower. She could breathe. She could think. She could just be herself. Her husband, Marcus, was her complete opposite in some ways. Where Sarah was quiet, Marcus could light up a room with his laugh. Where she loved staying home, he'd traveled all over the world. Marcus was a soldier, not just any soldier, but Delta Force. That meant he did things he could never talk about, went places he couldn't name, and sometimes disappeared for months at a time. But when Marcus was home, he was truly home. He'd help her plant seeds, fix the fence that the goats kept knocking down, and cook breakfast while she collected eggs. They'd met 5 years ago at a veterans hospital where Sarah volunteered on weekends. Marcus had been recovering from a shoulder injury, grumpy and frustrated at being stuck in one place. Sarah had been delivering books to patients when she walked into his room. "You look like you need a book," she'd said simply. "I need to get out of this bed," he'd replied. She'd smiled. "Well, until you can, you might as well travel through a story." That's how it started. She brought him a different book every week. They started talking about more than just stories. He told her about growing up in Alabama, joining the Army at 18, working his way up through sheer determination. She told him about her dream of having a farm, of growing things, of living a simple life away from the noise of the city. 6 months later, Marcus proposed to her under an oak tree on the property they'd just bought together. It was a massive tree, probably over 100 years old, with branches that spread out like welcoming arms. They got married right there, just the two of them and a justice of the peace with the oak tree as their witness. Life had been good these past 3 years. Really good. Sarah had built up her garden, started selling vegetables at the local farmers market on weekends, and made enough money to support the farm while Marcus was deployed. The people in Willowbrook had been kind and welcoming. Mrs. Chen, her elderly neighbor, would bring over homemade dumplings. Mr. Patterson down the road helped her when her tractor broke down. The lady who ran the farmers market always saved her a good spot. Then about 6 months ago, everything changed. The Henderson family bought the property next to theirs. Sarah didn't think much of it at first. New neighbors could be good. Maybe they'd help each other out during harvest season or share equipment. But the Hendersons weren't farmers. They were wealthy folks from Atlanta who'd bought the land as a country retreat. Their house was 3 times the size of Sarah's farmhouse, with a pool and fancy landscaping that looked out of place among the working farms. The real problem wasn't the Henderson parents, though. It was their son, Blake. Blake Henderson was 22 years old, home from college for reasons nobody talked about at first. Sarah later heard through town gossip that he'd been expelled from his university for something involving hazing and harassment. His parents had brought him home hoping the quiet country life would straighten him out. Instead, Blake brought his problems with him. He had 3 friends who came around constantly: Tyler, Josh, and Kevin. All of them were in their early 20s. All of them seemed to think that living in the country meant they could do whatever they wanted. They drove loud ATVs at all hours, threw parties that went until dawn, and treated the rural area like their personal playground. Sarah's first real problem with them happened about 5 months ago. She'd been working in her wheat field, checking on the growth, when she heard engines roaring. Before she could react, 4 ATVs came tearing through her field, crushing weeks of careful growth under their tires. They were laughing and whooping like it was the most fun they'd ever had. Sarah had stood there, watching her wheat she'd planted by hand, wheat she'd watered and cared for, wheat she was counting on to make extra money, destroyed in less than a minute. She felt her hands ball into fists, felt anger rise in her chest like she hadn't felt in years. But she took a deep breath and calmed herself down. Maybe they didn't know this was her field. Maybe it was an accident. She walked over to where they'd stopped their ATVs near the property line. Blake was pulling off his helmet, his face flushed with excitement. "Excuse me?" Sarah called out, keeping her voice polite and steady. "This is private property. You just drove through my wheat field." Blake looked at her like she was speaking another language. Then he smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "Oh, sorry about that. Didn't see it." "The field is clearly marked," Sarah said. "And there's a fence you drove around. I'm going to need you to pay for the damages, and please don't come through my property again." That's when Tyler laughed. Actually laughed. "Pay for it?" "Lady, it's just some grass. It'll grow back." "It's not grass, it's wheat," Sarah explained patiently. "It takes months to grow, and you've destroyed about half an acre. That's going to cost me money." Blake stepped closer to her, and Sarah noticed how his smile had turned cold. "Listen, maybe you city folks don't understand how things work out here in the country, but we're just having some fun. Nobody cares about a little patch of dirt." "I care," Sarah said firmly. "It's my livelihood, and I'm not from the city. I've lived here for 3 years." "3 years?" Blake laughed. "My family's had roots in Georgia for generations. You're just playing farmer." Sarah felt her face grow hot, but she kept her composure. "Regardless, you damaged my property. I'm going to report this to the sheriff." Kevin whistled low. "Ooh, she's going to tell on us. What are we, 5 years old?" "Do what you want," Blake said, mounting his ATV again. "My dad's on the town council." "Good luck with that." They drove off, and Sarah stood there in her ruined wheat field, her heart pounding. That night, when she tried to call Marcus, she got his voicemail. He was somewhere she couldn't reach him, doing something dangerous and important. She left a message trying to sound upbeat. "Hey honey, hope you're staying safe. Farm's good, miss you. Love you." She didn't tell him about the wheat field. Marcus had enough to worry about without adding her problems to his plate. Besides, she could handle this. She was tough. She'd dealt with worse things in life than some spoiled rich kids acting out. The next day, Sarah drove to the sheriff's office and filed a report. Sheriff Donovan listened to her story, took notes, and promised to look into it. But his eyes told a different story. When she mentioned Blake Henderson's name, she saw something shift in his expression, a kind of resignation, maybe even fear. "I'll have a talk with the boy," Sheriff Donovan said. I'm sure he didn't mean any harm, but Sarah knew better. She'd seen the look in Blake's eyes. He'd meant every bit of it. That was 5 months ago. Since then, things had only gotten worse. And Sarah, trying to be strong, trying not to burden her deployed husband, had kept it all to herself. She'd thought she could handle it. She'd thought if she just stayed quiet and kept to herself, eventually Blake and his friends would get bored and leave her alone. She was wrong. The wheat field incident was just the beginning. Sarah had hoped that maybe after she filed the police report, Blake and his friends would back off. Maybe they'd realize she was serious and leave her alone. For about a week, it seemed like that might actually happen. There were no ATVs roaring across her property, no loud parties next door. Sarah started to relax a little. Then one morning, she walked out to get her mail and found her mailbox lying on the ground, completely smashed. It looked like someone had hit it with a baseball bat over and over again. The wooden post was splintered, and her mail was scattered across the dirt road. Sarah stood there in her bathrobe and boots staring at the destruction, and felt something heavy settle in her stomach. She knew who'd done it. Of course she knew. Sarah gathered up her mail, bills mostly, and a letter from Marcus that made her smile despite everything, and carried the broken mailbox back to her barn. She'd fix it herself. She'd fixed plenty of things on the farm over the years. A mailbox was nothing, but it wasn't really about the mailbox, was it? It was about the message. We can get to you whenever we want. That same week, she found one of her garden hoses cut into pieces. Then 3 of her tomato plants were ripped up by the roots and thrown over the fence. Small things. Things that on their own might seem like accidents or random vandalism. But Sarah knew better. This was targeted. This was personal. She went back to Sheriff Donovan's office. This time he barely looked up from his computer. "More problems with the Henderson boy?" he asked, sounding tired. "Someone's vandalizing my property," Sarah said firmly. "Cut my hoses, destroyed my plants, smashed my mailbox. I know it's them. Do you have any proof?" the sheriff asked. "Any witnesses? Video footage? No, but who else would it be? They're the only ones who've had a problem with me." Sheriff Donovan sighed and leaned back in his chair, Look, Mrs. Matthews, I understand you're frustrated. But without evidence, there's nothing I can do. Could be kids from town. Could be anybody. It's not anybody, Sarah insisted. It's Blake Henderson and his friends. You know it is. The sheriff's face hardened a little. I'll make a note in your file. But I'd suggest you get some cameras if you're that worried. And maybe try to get along better with your neighbors. Sarah felt her mouth fall open. Get along better? They're destroying my property. All I'm saying is, sometimes country living means dealing with high spirits from young folks. Boys will be boys, you know? Sarah left the sheriff's office feeling more alone than she'd felt since moving to Willowbrook. Boys will be boys. She'd heard that excuse her whole life, usually right before someone got away with something terrible. That night, she tried calling Marcus again. This time he picked up, and just hearing his voice made her feel better. Hey, baby, Marcus said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. I've got maybe 5 minutes. How's my best girl? Sarah wanted to tell him everything. About Blake, about the vandalism, about how scared she was starting to feel on her own farm. But then she heard voices in the background on his end, heard someone shout something urgent, and she realized this wasn't the time. I'm good, she lied. Farm's great. The tomatoes are coming in nice. That's my Sarah, Marcus said warmly. Listen, I gotta go, but I'll call you when I can. I love you so much. You're doing an amazing job keeping everything running. Love you too, Sarah whispered. Stay safe. After he hung up, Sarah sat on her porch for a long time looking out at her dark fields. She hated lying to Marcus. They'd always been honest with each other. But what could he do from thousands of miles away except worry? No, she'd handle this herself. The next day, Sarah took Sheriff Donovan's advice and bought security cameras. She installed them herself, mounting them on the barn and house to cover the main areas of her property. It took her all day, and she wasn't sure she'd done it right, but at least now she'd have some evidence if anything else happened. For a few weeks, the cameras seemed to work. Nothing was vandalized. Sarah started to hope that maybe seeing the cameras had scared Blake off. She went about her normal routines, tending her gardens, selling at the farmer's market, taking care of her animals. Mrs. Chen came over with dumplings one evening, and they sat on the porch talking about nothing important, and Sarah felt almost normal again. Then she woke up one morning and knew immediately that something was wrong. The chickens were making strange sounds, not their usual clucking, but distressed noises that made Sarah's heart race. She pulled on her boots and ran outside. The chicken coop door was hanging open. Inside, 3 of her chickens were dead. Not killed by a predator. She'd seen plenty of fox and hawk attacks over the years. These chickens had been killed by something worse. By someone. Sarah felt her knees go weak. She loved her chickens. She'd raised them from chicks, named each one, collected their eggs every morning, and now 3 of them were just gone, killed for no reason except cruelty. She buried them near the oak tree, tears streaming down her face as she dug. When she was done, she checked her security cameras. But the coop was just far enough away that the cameras hadn't caught anything useful, just shadows moving in the distance around 3 in the morning. This time, Sarah didn't even bother going to the sheriff. She took the dead chickens to the local veterinarian instead, Doc Morrison, who'd been practicing in Willowbrook for 30 years. Doc Morrison examined the chickens and shook his head sadly. These weren't killed by any animal, Sarah. Someone did this deliberately. I'm sorry. Can you write that down? Sarah asked. An official statement? Of course, he said kindly. And Sarah, I've heard about your troubles with the Henderson boy. A lot of us have. I'm sorry nobody's doing anything about it. You've heard? Sarah was surprised. Small town, Doc Morrison said. Word gets around. For what it's worth, most folks think what's happening to you is wrong. But Blake's daddy has a lot of influence around here. Sarah took Doc Morrison's statement and added it to the growing file she was keeping. Every incident, every date, every detail. She might not have the sheriff on her side, but she was documenting everything. Someday, somehow, this evidence would matter. That night, she finally broke down and tried to reach Marcus through the emergency line the military had given her. It was supposed to be only for real emergencies, life or death situations. But Sarah was starting to feel like maybe this qualified. She was alone, being terrorized, and no one was helping her. The call went through to a military operator. This is an emergency line for deployed service members, a crisp voice said. What is the nature of your emergency? I need to reach my husband, Sergeant Marcus Matthews, Sarah said. I'm being harassed and is anyone in immediate physical danger right now? No, but then I'm sorry, ma'am, but this line is for active emergencies only. Your husband is currently on a classified mission and cannot be reached. You can leave a message and we'll pass it along when possible. Sarah hung up without leaving a message. What would she even say? She wasn't dying. Nobody was hurt. She just felt scared and alone and helpless. But Sarah Matthews wasn't the type to stay helpless for long. The next day, she installed more cameras, these ones covering the chicken coop and the back fields. She bought motion sensor lights and put them up around her property. She even bought a baseball bat and kept it by her bed, though she hated admitting she felt like she needed it. The harassment continued in small ways. Her truck tires were slashed one night. Another time, someone threw eggs at her house. She'd see Blake and his friends driving by slowly, laughing and pointing. Once, Tyler rolled down his window and shouted something crude that made Sarah's face burn with anger and shame. She started varying her routines, never doing things at the same time each day. She stopped going into town except when absolutely necessary. The farmer's market became her only regular outing, and even then she was constantly looking over her shoulder. Mrs. Chen noticed the change. "You seem worried, dear," she said one afternoon over tea. Just tired, Sarah lied, not wanting to burden her elderly neighbor. But the truth was, Sarah was more than tired. She was starting to feel like a prisoner on her own property. Every morning she woke up wondering what would be destroyed or broken. Every night she lay in bed listening to every sound, unable to relax. She missed Marcus with an ache that felt physical. She missed feeling safe. She missed being the peaceful, content woman who'd loved this farm and this life. Blake and his friends were taking that away from her, piece by piece. And the worst part was, Sarah was starting to wonder if maybe she should just give up and leave. Sell the farm, move somewhere else, start over. But then she'd look at the oak tree where she and Marcus had gotten married, and she'd feel her resolve harden. This was her home. She wouldn't be driven away by some spoiled bullies who thought they could do whatever they wanted. Sarah didn't know it yet, but things were about to get much worse before they got better. Blake Henderson was about to take things too far, farther than even he probably intended. And when he did, the quiet farm girl he'd been tormenting would prove to be much stronger than he ever imagined. And her husband, thousands of miles away, would prove to be exactly the kind of man you never, ever wanted to mess with. Tuesday started out like any other day. Sarah woke up at 5:30, fed her animals, collected eggs from the remaining chickens, and ate a simple breakfast of toast and coffee. The morning was beautiful. Clear blue sky, birds singing, a gentle breeze that smelled like summer. It was the kind of morning that usually made Sarah grateful for her life, but she couldn't shake a feeling of unease. Maybe it was just paranoia after months of harassment, or maybe it was instinct, some deep part of her brain that knew something bad was coming. Marcus had called the night before, a brief conversation where he sounded tired and stressed. He'd asked about the farm, and Sarah had done what she'd been doing for months, painted a picture of everything being fine. The tomatoes were good. Bessie the cow was healthy. The weather was cooperating. All lies by omission. But how could she burden him when he was in danger every single day? "I should be home in about 6 weeks," Marcus had said. "I'm counting down the days, baby." "Me too," Sarah had whispered, and that part was completely true. After breakfast, Sarah decided to work in the back field, the one farthest from the house. Her tomatoes were ready for harvesting, and if she didn't get them picked soon, they'd be overripe. She grabbed her basket, put on her wide-brimmed hat to protect from the sun, and headed out. The work was peaceful and methodical. Pick a tomato, check it for ripeness, place it gently in the basket. Move to the next plant, repeat. Sarah's mind wandered as she worked, thinking about what she'd make for dinner, whether she should plant more squash next season, how good it would feel when Marcus was finally home. That's when she heard them. The sound of ATV engines had become horribly familiar over the past months, but usually they stayed on their side of the property line, just close enough to be annoying. This time the sound was getting louder, coming closer, heading directly toward her. Sarah straightened up, shielding her eyes against the sun. She could see 4 ATVs racing across her field, tearing up the ground, heading straight for her. Her heart started pounding. Something about this felt different, more aggressive, more dangerous. She stood her ground as they approached, forcing herself to look calm even though fear was creeping up her spine. The ATVs circled her once, twice, kicking up dust and noise before finally stopping. Blake, Tyler, Josh, and Kevin dismounted, and Sarah noticed immediately that something was wrong. Their eyes were strange, too bright, too wild. She wondered if they'd been drinking or maybe something worse. "You need to leave," Sarah said firmly, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "You're trespassing on my property." Blake laughed, but it wasn't his usual mocking laugh. This one was meaner, sharper. "Your property? That's funny. See, I've been thinking about that. You don't really belong here, do you?" "I belong here as much as anyone," Sarah replied, taking a small step backward. "Now please leave, or I'm calling the police." "Go ahead and call them," Tyler said, pulling out his phone and waving it at her. "Oh, wait, you can't, because we're way out here in the backfield and nobody's coming to save you." That's when real fear hit Sarah. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was something worse. She looked at their faces. 4 young men, all bigger and stronger than her, all looking at her like she was a problem they intended to solve. "Whatever you're thinking about doing, don't," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the terror rising in her chest. "My husband is Delta Force. You don't want that kind of trouble." "Your husband isn't here," Blake said, stepping closer. "He's never here. And you know what? I'm tired of having to deal with you. Tired of you acting like you're better than us. Tired of you running to the sheriff like a little tattletale." Sarah reached for her phone, but Josh was faster. He knocked it out of her hand and it fell into the dirt several feet away. Before she could move, Tyler grabbed her arms. She fought, kicked and screamed and struggled with everything she had. But 4 against 1 wasn't a fair fight. "Let me go," Sarah shouted, still fighting even as they dragged her toward the oak tree. "You can't do this. This is assault. You'll go to prison." "Who's going to believe you?" Kevin said, and Sarah heard something in his voice that sounded almost like regret, like maybe he knew this was wrong but was going along with it anyway. "It's your word against ours. And my dad's a lawyer." They pulled her arms behind her back against the tree trunk. Sarah felt rough rope against her wrists and realized with horror that they'd planned this. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment thing. They'd brought rope. They'd intended to do this all along. "Please," Sarah said, hating the pleading in her voice but too scared to care about pride. "Please don't do this. I'll leave you alone. I'll stop filing reports. Just let me go." Blake pulled the rope tighter, wrapping it around her torso and the tree. "You should have left us alone months ago. You should have just stayed quiet and accepted that this is our town, not yours." The rope bit into Sarah's arms and chest. It wasn't tight enough to cut off her breathing, but it was tight enough that she couldn't move, couldn't reach the knots, couldn't escape. She was completely helpless, tied to the tree where she'd married Marcus 3 years ago. The irony was almost too painful to bear. Tyler stepped back, looking at their handiwork. "How long do you think it'll take for someone to find her?" "Does it matter?" Blake pulled out his phone and started taking pictures. "This is perfect," finally putting her in her place. Josh and Kevin took out their phones too, snapping photos and even recording video. They were laughing, making jokes, acting like this was the funniest thing they'd ever done. Sarah closed her eyes, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. "Smile for the camera," Blake taunted, holding his phone close to her face. Sarah kept her eyes closed and her mouth shut. She wouldn't give him anything. Not her fear, not her tears, not her dignity. After what felt like forever but was probably only a few minutes, she heard them getting back on their ATVs. "Have fun out here," Blake called out. "I hear it's supposed to get down to 50 degrees tonight. Hope someone finds you before then." The engines roared to life and they drove away, their laughter fading into the distance. And then Sarah was alone. For several long minutes she just breathed. In and out, in and out. Panic wouldn't help her. She needed to think clearly. The rope was professionally tied. Probably Blake had learned it in Boy Scouts or something equally ridiculous. She couldn't reach the knots no matter how she twisted. The tree trunk was too wide for her to shimmy around. She was well and truly stuck. The worst part was Blake was right. Nobody was going to find her out here. Mrs. Chen wouldn't check on her until tomorrow at the earliest. The backfield wasn't visible from the road. She could scream her lungs out and nobody would hear. Her phone. Where was her phone? Sarah craned her neck and spotted it in the dirt about 10 feet away. Too far, impossibly far. She felt tears of frustration burning her eyes and blinked them away. Crying wouldn't help. Then she remembered. The old flip phone. The one Marcus had insisted she keep even after she got a smartphone. Just as a backup, he'd said. Keep it charged, keep it in your pocket, and if anything ever happens, you can use it. Sarah had thought he was being overprotective. She'd almost donated the phone to the charity drive last month, but she'd kept it, more out of love for Marcus than any practical reason. And this morning, out of pure habit, she'd slipped it into her back pocket. With slow, careful movements, Sarah worked her bound hand toward her pocket. The rope was tight, but there was just enough give. Her fingers brushed against the phone. She nearly dropped it, caught it, pulled it out slowly. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost couldn't hold it. One bar of signal. Just one, but it was enough. Sarah's thumb hovered over the keypad. She could call 911. But would they believe her? Would they think this was urgent enough? She'd spent months trying to get the local police to help, and they'd done nothing. Maybe they'd think this was just another complaint, not a real emergency. No, there was only one person who would move heaven and earth to help her. Sarah dialed Marcus's emergency number, the one she'd been told to only use in life-threatening situations. Her heart pounded as it rang once, twice, 3 times. Please pick up, she prayed. Please pick up. Sarah? Marcus's voice was sharp with alarm. He knew she would never call this number unless something was terribly wrong. Marcus. She tried to keep her voice steady, but it cracked. I need you. And in that moment, thousands of miles away, something changed. The quiet farm girl who'd tried so hard to handle everything alone had finally asked for help. And her Delta Force husband, trained for exactly these moments, shifted into the kind of focused determination that had made him one of the most effective soldiers in the world. Blake Henderson and his friends had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They'd hurt someone who was protected by one of the most dangerous men in the military, and they had no idea what was about to come down on them like a hammer, but they were going to find out very, very soon. Marcus felt his blood run cold the moment he heard Sarah's voice. In 5 years together, through his deployments and her struggles to keep the farm running, through everything they'd faced, Sarah had never said those words to him. I need you. She was the strongest, most independent person he knew, which meant whatever was happening was serious. Talk to me, baby. Where are you? Marcus was already moving, striding away from the briefing tent, his hand signals telling his team leader that something critical was happening. Tied to our tree, the oak tree. Her voice was quiet, controlled, but Marcus could hear the tremor underneath, the fear she was trying so hard to hide. The Henderson boy and his friends, they tied me up and left me here. Marcus felt something cold and sharp settle in his chest. It was the same feeling he got in combat, when emotions had to be locked away and only the mission mattered. But this wasn't just any mission. This was Sarah, his wife. The woman who made him laugh, who kept him grounded, who was his whole reason for coming home alive from every deployment. Are they still there? He asked, his voice deadly calm. No, they left maybe 10 minutes ago. They took pictures, Marcus. Videos. They said nobody would believe me because his father is on the town council. Marcus's jaw clenched. He was already running through scenarios in his head, calculating times and distances, figuring out what resources he could deploy. Listen to me very carefully. Are you injured? Any pain? Any trouble breathing? No, just tied up. I've tried to get loose, but I can't reach the knots. Okay, you did exactly the right thing calling me. I need you to stay on the line, but I'm about to make some other calls. Can you do that for me? I'm not going anywhere, Sarah said, and despite everything, he heard a tiny thread of her usual humor. That was his Sarah, finding the strength to make a joke even in the worst situation of her life. Marcus's next call was to James Rodriguez, J-Rod, his former Delta teammate who'd retired 2 years ago after taking shrapnel in his leg during a mission in Syria. J-Rod now ran a private security company out of Charlotte, North Carolina, and Marcus knew he could be trusted absolutely. J-Rod, it's Marcus. I need a favor. Emergency situation. My wife has been assaulted and physically restrained on our property in Willowbrook, Georgia. I need boots on the ground immediately. J-Rod's response was instant. Send me the coordinates. I've got 2 guys finishing up a close protection job about 20 minutes from there. Ryan Chen and Mike Foster. Both former Rangers, both solid. They'll be there in 15 minutes. Thank you, brother. Marcus, J-Rod's voice was serious. You need anything else, you call me, anything. Marcus's third call was to his commanding officer, Colonel Harrison. It was 0400 hours in Afghanistan, but the colonel picked up on the second ring. Matthews, this better be important. Sir, I need emergency leave effective immediately. My wife has been attacked on our property in Georgia. She's currently tied to a tree and unable to free herself. There was a pause. Then, Jesus Christ, go get your wife. I'll handle the paperwork and brief the team. There's a helicopter heading to Bagram Air Base in 30 minutes for a supply run. Be on it. They'll get you to a transport back to the States. Thank you, sir. Matthews, when you get home, you handle this however you need to handle it. If you need the unit lawyer, call. If you need resources, call. Nobody messes with our families. The fourth call was the one that would make the most difference. Marcus called the FBI field office in Atlanta. 2 years ago, during a joint operation hunting an arms dealer who was supplying terrorists, Marcus had pulled FBI agent Tom Morrison out of an ambush, probably saving his life. They'd stayed in touch afterward, the kind of friendship forged in danger. Morrison, the agent answered. Tom, it's Marcus Matthews. I need to report a federal hate crime in progress. Talk to me. Marcus laid it out in clear, concise terms. The months of harassment, the property destruction, the local police doing nothing, and now Sarah tied to a tree and abandoned. He sent Morrison the screenshots of the social media posts that Blake had been stupid enough to make before deleting. Posts bragging about handling the problem and teaching the new neighbor a lesson. They documented their own crime, Morrison said, disbelief in his voice. Apparently they're not very smart. Give me 30 minutes, Morrison said. I'll have state police and our Atlanta field agents heading to Willowbrook. And Marcus? I'm sorry this happened to your wife. We'll handle it. By the time Marcus got back on the line with Sarah, barely 20 minutes had passed, though it felt like hours. Baby, still with me? Still here, Sarah said, and he could hear how tired she sounded. Okay, listen. I've got 2 former Rangers named Ryan Chen and Mike Foster heading your way right now. Should be there in less than 10 minutes. They're good guys, they're professionals, and they're going to get you free and safe. Can you hear any vehicles? Sarah was quiet for a moment. Yes, I hear something coming. That'll be them. I also called the FBI. Federal agents are coming. And I'm getting on a helicopter in about 5 minutes that'll start me on my way home. I'm coming, Sarah. I'm coming as fast as I can. I know, Sarah whispered. I should have called you sooner. I should have told you what was happening. Marcus felt his heart clench. We'll talk about that later. Right now, I just need you to know that you're safe. You're going to be okay. Those kids have no idea what they just brought down on themselves. A new voice came through Sarah's phone. Mrs. Matthews? I'm Ryan Chen with Sentinel Security. Your husband sent us. You're safe now. Marcus heard rustling sounds, then Sarah's voice shaky with relief. Thank you. Thank you so much. We're going to get you free now, Ryan said calmly. Mike's documenting everything with photos before we cut the ropes. For evidence. Marcus heard the sound of a knife cutting through rope, then Sarah's small gasp of relief. Oh God, thank you. Mrs. Matthews, that was a different voice, must be Mike Foster. Are you injured anywhere? Do you need medical attention? I'm okay, Sarah said. Just some rope burns on my wrists. But I'm okay. Ryan came back on the line. Sergeant Matthews? This is Chen. Your wife is free and safe. We've documented the scene and we're going to transport her back to her house. Local police are being notified, but we're also waiting for state police to arrive. The locals here seem unreliable. That's a good assessment, Marcus said grimly. Stay with her until the state police or FBI arrive. Don't let the local sheriff anywhere near her alone. Copy that. And Ryan? Thank you. I owe you one. No, you don't, Ryan said simply. No, you don't, Ryan said simply. This is what we do. Your wife seems like good people. We'll take care of her until you get here. Marcus heard Sarah's voice in the background talking to Mike, and just the sound of her voice, shaky but strong, made his chest feel tight. She was okay. She was safe. But someone had hurt her, terrorized her, tied her to a tree like an animal. And they'd been doing it for months while he'd been halfway around the world completely unaware. Sarah, baby, you still there? Marcus asked. I'm here. Her voice was stronger now. Marcus, they took videos. They posted some of it online before deleting it, but someone might have saved it. Don't worry about that, Marcus said, his voice gentle even as his mind was cataloging everything he needed to do. That's actually good for us. Digital evidence doesn't really disappear. We'll get it all. Right now, I just need you to go home with Ryan and Mike, get cleaned up, get checked out. Don't talk to the local sheriff if you can avoid it. Wait for the state police or FBI. Okay, Sarah said quietly. When will you be home? Marcus calculated quickly. Helicopter to Bagram. Transport flight to Ramstein Air Base in Germany. Another flight to Dover Air Force Base in Delaware. Then a final flight to Atlanta. Even with military priority, even with every string pulled, it would take at least 24 hours. I'll be there tomorrow, he promised. Less than 24 hours. Can you hold on for me until then? I've held on for months, Sarah said, and there was something in her voice. Not bitterness exactly, but exhaustion. I can make it one more day. Marcus heard a vehicle approaching through Sarah's phone. Then Ryan's voice alert. Local sheriff just pulled up. Don't let him intimidate her, Marcus said quickly. State police should be there within the hour. I won't let anyone intimidate her, Ryan promised. Marcus heard a car door slam, then a familiar voice. Sheriff Donovan. From all of Sarah's descriptions. What's going on here? The sheriff demanded. I got a call about some kind of disturbance. Sheriff Donovan. Ryan's voice was professional and cool. I'm Ryan Chen with Sentinel Security. Mrs. Matthews was physically assaulted, bound with rope, and abandoned on her property. We've documented the scene and are awaiting state police. Now hold on, the sheriff said, and Marcus could practically hear him puffing up. This is my jurisdiction. I'll handle this investigation. With all due respect, Sheriff, Mike Foster's voice joined in. Your office has failed to act on multiple previous reports from Mrs. Matthews regarding harassment and property destruction. Federal authorities have been notified and are en route. Federal authorities? This is a local matter. It's a hate crime, Sheriff, Ryan said flatly, which makes it federal, and the perpetrators documented their crime and posted it on social media, which makes it a slam dunk case. Now you can either cooperate with the investigation, or you can explain to the FBI why you're obstructing justice. There was a long silence. Then the sheriff's voice, quieter now. Mrs. Matthews, I'll need to take your statement. She'll give her statement to the state police, Ryan said. Until they arrive, we're securing the scene and ensuring Mrs. Matthews' safety. Marcus felt a surge of gratitude for J-Rod's guys. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they weren't intimidated by some small-town sheriff. Sarah, Marcus said, I need to get on that helicopter, but I'll call you as soon as I land in Germany, okay? And I'll keep calling every chance I get until I'm home. Okay, Sarah said softly. Marcus, I love you. I love you too, baby. More than anything. And Sarah? This ends now, all of it. Those kids are going to learn they picked the wrong person to mess with. Sarah sat in her kitchen, wrapped in a blanket even though it wasn't cold, watching Ryan and Mike document everything in her house. They'd found the file she'd been keeping. Every incident, every date, every photo of damaged property. Ryan had let out a low whistle when he saw how organized it was. This is good work, Mrs. Matthews, he'd said. Really good. This shows a clear pattern of escalating harassment. Doc Morrison had come to the house to examine her rope burns and document them for the record. He'd been gentle and kind, treating her wrists with antibiotic ointment and wrapping them in clean bandages. I'm sorry this happened to you, Sarah, he'd said quietly. A lot of us knew something was wrong, but we didn't know how bad it had gotten. Sarah didn't know what to say to that. Part of her wanted to be angry at everyone who'd known something but done nothing. But another part understood. She was a newcomer to a small town where the Henderson family had roots and power. Speaking up was risky. Still, it hurt. The state police arrived within 45 minutes of Sarah being freed. Captain Williams was a tall woman in her 50s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She took Sarah's statement personally, recording everything while Mike and Ryan provided their observations as witnesses. Mrs. Matthews, Captain Williams said when Sarah finished her account, I want you to know that we're treating this as a serious assault case. My officers are currently locating Blake Henderson and his 3 friends for questioning. Will they actually face charges? Sarah asked, trying to keep the skepticism out of her voice. Yes, Captain Williams said firmly. Based on your statement, the physical evidence, and the social media post we've already recovered, we have enough to charge all 4 of them with kidnapping, assault, battery, and criminal restraint. If the FBI determines this was a hate crime, federal charges will be added. Sarah felt something loosen in her chest. Finally someone in authority was taking this seriously. Sheriff Donovan had left about 20 minutes earlier, looking embarrassed and defeated. Before he went, Captain Williams had pulled him aside for a conversation that Sarah couldn't hear, but could definitely read in their body language. The sheriff's shoulders had slumped more and more as the state police captain talked to him. FBI agent Tom Morrison arrived just as Sarah was finishing with the state police. He was in his 40s, professional and thorough, and he spent 2 hours going through everything with Sarah again. Every incident, every threat, every piece of evidence. "Mrs. Matthews, I've been in touch with your husband," Agent Morrison said. "He saved my life 2 years ago in Pakistan. I owe him everything. But even if I didn't, what happened to you today is exactly the kind of case the FBI exists to prosecute." By the time night fell, Sarah's small farmhouse was like a command center. State police were processing evidence from the scene. FBI agents were tracking down every social media post Blake and his friends had made. Ryan and Mike had set up a proper security system that would have made Fort Knox jealous. Marcus called every 2 hours as he made his way across the world. Each time Sarah heard his voice, she felt a little bit stronger. "How you holding up, baby?" he asked during his layover in Germany. "I'm okay," Sarah said. And for the first time it was mostly true. There are about 15 law enforcement people here. Ryan and Mike won't leave. Mrs. Chen brought over enough food to feed an army. "That's my Sarah," Marcus said warmly, strong as steel. "Listen, I'm getting on a flight in about 10 minutes. Next time I call, I'll be on American soil, and then I'm coming straight to you." "I'll be here," Sarah promised. While Sarah was surrounded by protection and support, Blake Henderson and his friends were having a very different evening. State police had picked up all 4 of them within 2 hours of the incident. They'd been questioned separately, and their stories, which they'd apparently not coordinated beforehand, didn't match up. Blake tried to claim it was just a prank. Tyler said they were just trying to scare her. Josh admitted they'd tied her up but insisted they were going to come back and let her go. Kevin broke down crying and admitted the whole thing, including months of previous harassment. Their phones were confiscated, and the forensic team recovered everything. The photos they'd taken of Sarah tied to the tree, the videos they'd recorded, the deleted social media posts that bragged about putting her in her place, the text messages planning various acts of vandalism over the previous months. Even better, Josh's phone had a video he'd recorded during the wheat field incident 5 months earlier, showing all 4 of them laughing about destroying Sarah's crops. It was a prosecutor's dream, a complete digital record of escalating criminal behavior. Blake's father, Councilman Henderson, arrived at the state police station with the family's lawyer, confident that his influence would solve this problem like it had solved Blake's problems before. Captain Williams met them in the lobby. "My son did nothing wrong," Councilman Henderson blustered. "This is a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by an oversensitive woman." Captain Williams's expression didn't change. "Your son and 3 accomplices physically restrained a woman, tied her to a tree with rope, and abandoned her in a remote location while taking photographs and videos of her distress. That's not a misunderstanding. That's kidnapping and assault at minimum and possibly a federal hate crime." The councilman's face paled. "Now wait just a minute." "No, you wait," Captain Williams said, her voice hard as stone. "This investigation is being conducted by state police and the FBI. Your position on the Willowbrook Town Council gives you exactly 0 influence here. Your son and his friends are being charged as adults, and based on the evidence, they will likely see prison time. You can't. I can, and I am. Now your son has been read his rights. He's refused to answer questions without a lawyer present, which is his right. But I suggest you get him a very good lawyer, because he's going to need one." By midnight, all 4 young men had been formally charged and were being held pending bail hearings. The story had started to leak to the media. Not the full details, but enough that reporters were asking questions. That's where Marcus's journalist friend David Chen came in. David had been investigating the story throughout the day, making calls, gathering information, and putting together a comprehensive report on the systematic harassment Sarah had endured and the local police department's failure to act. When his story hit CNN's website at 6 in the morning, East Coast time, it exploded. "Military wife tied to tree. While husband deployed, local police ignored months of harassment" was the headline. The article was thorough, well-sourced, and devastating. It included interviews with Doc Morrison, Mrs. Chen, and several other townspeople who'd witnessed the Henderson boys' behavior. Most importantly, it included the recovered photos and videos. With Sarah's face blurred out for her privacy, showing exactly what Blake and his friends had done. The images were shocking, and the public response was immediate and furious. By the time Marcus's plane landed at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport at 8 in the morning, the story was trending on social media. People were outraged. Veterans groups were calling for justice. Civil rights organizations were demanding federal hate crime charges. Marcus didn't pay attention to any of it. He rented a car and drove straight to Willowbrook, covering the 2-hour drive in 90 minutes. When he pulled up to their farmhouse, he saw Ryan and Mike still there, standing guard even though the threat was long gone. "She's inside," Ryan said simply. "Been waiting for you." Marcus walked through his front door and found Sarah in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a cup of tea. She looked up when he entered, and their eyes met. She stood, and Marcus crossed the room in 3 strides, pulling her into his arms. Sarah buried her face in his chest and finally let herself cry, not just for what happened yesterday, but for all the months of fear and loneliness she'd carried alone. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I should have told you. I thought I could handle it." "Shh." Marcus held her tighter. "You did tell me. When it mattered most, you called me. That's what counts." They stood there for a long time, holding each other, reconnecting after months apart. Finally, Sarah pulled back and looked up at him. "They arrested all 4 of them," she said. "Captain Williams said they'll probably go to prison." "They will," Marcus said with absolute certainty. "I'm going to make sure of it. But first, I'm going to make sure you're okay. Really okay." "I am now," Sarah said, and she meant it. With Marcus home, with the law finally on her side, with the truth finally out in the open, she felt like she could breathe again. Outside, the sun was climbing higher in the Georgia sky, promising another beautiful day. And for the first time in months, Sarah believed she'd be able to enjoy it. But the story wasn't over yet. Justice had arrived, but it still needed to be served. And Marcus Matthews, Delta Force operator and devoted husband, was going to make absolutely certain that the people who'd hurt his wife faced every possible consequence for their actions. The bail hearing for Blake Henderson and his 3 friends was held the following Monday. The courtroom was packed with reporters, curious townspeople, and several members of veterans, organizations who'd driven from Atlanta to show support for Sarah and Marcus. Blake's lawyer argued that his client was a good kid from a good family who'd made a terrible mistake. He asked for bail to be set at $10,000. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Amanda Garcia, who'd been personally assigned to the case by the state attorney general, stood up with a thick folder of evidence, Your Honor. The defendant and his accomplices engaged in a months-long campaign of harassment, vandalism, and intimidation against Mrs. Sarah Matthews, she said crisply. This culminated in physically restraining her, binding her with rope to a tree, and abandoning her in a remote location while documenting their crime with photographs and videos. They showed no remorse at the scene. In fact, they were laughing. Prosecutor Garcia opened her folder and pulled out printed screenshots. These are social media posts the defendants made before deleting them. One says, and I quote, "Finally solved our problem with the neighbor. She won't be complaining anymore." Another says, "City people need to learn their place." The judge's expression grew stern as he reviewed the evidence. "Bail is set at $250,000 each," he declared. "The defendants are also ordered to wear ankle monitors and are prohibited from leaving the county or having any contact with Mrs. Matthews." Blake's father stood up, his face red with anger. "This is outrageous. That's excessive bail for a prank gone wrong." The judge turned cold eyes on him. "Councilman Henderson, your son committed felony assault and kidnapping. He's lucky I'm granting bail at all. One more outburst and I'll hold you in contempt. Sit down." The councilman sat. In the weeks that followed, the legal process moved forward with surprising speed. The evidence was overwhelming: videos, photos, text messages, testimony from multiple witnesses, and even the rope that still had Sarah's skin cells on it from where it had rubbed against her wrists. The FBI officially classified the crime as a hate crime based on the pattern of racial slurs in the defendants, text messages, and social media posts. Federal charges were added to the state charges. Faced with the mountain of evidence against them, all 4 defendants eventually accepted plea deals. Blake Henderson, as the ringleader, received 7 years in federal prison. Tyler Morrison got 5 years. Josh Keller got 4 years. Kevin Watts, who had cooperated fully with investigators and shown genuine remorse, received 3 years with the possibility of parole after 18 months. All 4 were also ordered to pay restitution for the property damage they'd caused over the previous months. The total came to over $40,000. But the legal consequences weren't the end of the story. The investigation into Sheriff Donovan revealed that he'd deliberately ignored multiple reports from Sarah and had failed to properly investigate obvious crimes. He was forced to resign, and the state police recommended charges of official misconduct. He eventually pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor and was banned from ever working in law enforcement again. The Willowbrook Police Department underwent a complete reform, with new leadership and mandatory training on how to properly handle harassment and hate crime reports. For Sarah and Marcus, healing came more slowly than justice did. Marcus extended his leave and then, after long conversations with Sarah and his commanding officer, made the decision to retire from active duty. He'd served for 17 years, been on countless missions, and earned more medals than he could count. But Sarah needed him home and he needed to be there. "Are you sure?" Sarah asked him one evening as they sat on their porch swing. "Marcus, I don't want you to give up your career because of me." "I'm not giving it up because of you," Marcus said gently. "I'm choosing you. There's a difference. I've been thinking about retiring for a while now. This just helped me make the decision. But you love what you do." "I love you more," Marcus said simply, "and I'm ready for the next chapter. There are other ways I can serve. J-Rod's been trying to recruit me for his security company for years. Or maybe I'll start my own business. Maybe we'll expand the farm. I don't know yet. But what I do know is that I want to be here with you, building our life together." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling a peace she hadn't felt in a very long time. The farm began to heal along with Sarah. Marcus helped her replant the wheat field that had been destroyed. They expanded the vegetable gardens and added a small orchard. Marcus's military skills turned out to translate surprisingly well to farm work. He approached every task with the same focused determination he'd brought to missions. Mrs. Chen became a daily presence, often bringing lunch and staying to help in the garden. Other neighbors, emboldened by the outcome of the case, started stopping by more often. Sarah learned that she had more support in the community than she'd realized. People had been afraid to speak up before, but now they felt safe to show their friendship. The farmer's market manager approached Sarah with an apology and an offer: a permanent premium spot, free of charge for the first year, as the market's way of saying sorry for not supporting her more actively. Sarah accepted but used the free year to help another young farmer get started. That was Sarah's way, always thinking of others, always turning her pain into purpose. 6 months after the incident, Sarah and Marcus hosted a community barbecue on their farm. Over 100 people showed up, neighbors, new friends from the veterans community Marcus had connected with, the state police officers who'd taken Sarah's case seriously, even Prosecutor Garcia and her family. Ryan and Mike came too, and Sarah was delighted to discover that Ryan had brought his grandmother, who turned out to be Mrs. Chen's old friend. The 2 elderly women spent the afternoon laughing and gossiping, while Ryan and Marcus grilled burgers. As Sarah watched everyone gathered on her property, eating food from her garden, talking and laughing under the shade of the old oak tree, she felt a surge of gratitude. That tree had witnessed the worst day of her life, but it had also witnessed her wedding, and now it was witnessing her recovery. "You okay?" Marcus asked, appearing at her side with 2 glasses of lemonade. "Better than okay," Sarah said honestly. "I was just thinking. Those boys tried to make me afraid of my own home. They tried to drive me away. But instead, look at this." She gestured at the gathering. "They failed. Not only did I stay, but I found my community. Real community, not just people who live nearby." "That's because you're strong," Marcus said proudly, stronger than they ever understood. "We're strong," Sarah corrected. "I couldn't have done this without you." "You held out for 6 months before you called me," Marcus pointed out. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." Sarah considered that. Maybe he was right. She'd survived months of harassment. She'd kept her farm running. She'd documented everything carefully and methodically, and when things got truly dangerous, she'd known when to ask for help. That wasn't weakness. That was strength and wisdom combined. A year after the incident, Sarah started something new. She began offering free workshops on her farm for anyone who wanted to learn about sustainable farming, self-sufficiency, and standing up to bullying. She partnered with the local school system to create a program teaching middle school students about respect, community, and the consequences of harassment. She told her story, not for attention, but to help others who might be going through similar situations. She wanted people to know they weren't alone. She wanted them to know that asking for help wasn't weakness. And she wanted them to know that bullies might seem powerful, but justice was more powerful still. Marcus started working with J-Rod's company part-time, providing security consultation for military families and helping train new operators. But he made sure he was home every night for dinner with Sarah. They'd sit on their porch swing as the sun set, talking about their day, making plans, just being together. Some evenings they'd walk out to the oak tree and stand under its branches. Still standing, Marcus would say. Still growing, Sarah would reply. And they were. Both of them. The trauma of what had happened didn't disappear. Sarah still had nightmares sometimes, still felt anxious when she heard ATV engines in the distance. But she'd learned to work through it, with Marcus's support and help from a therapist who specialized in trauma. The farm thrived. Sarah's vegetables were the talk of the farmer's market. People drove from 3 counties away to buy her tomatoes. She hired 2 part-time helpers, young people from town who were good and kind and reminded Sarah that most people were decent. Blake Henderson's family sold their property and moved away from Willowbrook, unable to face the shame and judgment of their neighbors. The new owners were a retired couple who loved gardening and quickly became good friends with Sarah and Marcus. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Sarah and Marcus renewed their vows under the oak tree. This time there were 50 people in attendance, friends, family, neighbors, and some of Marcus's military buddies who'd come to celebrate with them. As Sarah stood under that tree, holding Marcus's hands and repeating their vows, she thought about everything that tree had seen, their wedding, her worst day, and now this, a celebration of survival, of love, of community, of justice.